The reception hall buzzed with the strange harmonics of two species attempting diplomacy. Admiral Zaxful stood near the refreshment table, his exoskeleton adjusted to mimic the formal posture of the humans, while his primary sensory membranes continuously catalogued the unfamiliar environment. The chandelier lights reflected off his iridescent carapace as he sipped the ceremonial drink. Champagne, they called it, and found the carbonation oddly pleasing against his filter tissues. "Admiral, may I introduce Dr. Eleanor Weston, our leading xenobiologist." Ambassador Chen guided a tall human female toward him. "She's been instrumental in preparing our cultural exchange protocols." The Admiral's translation implant processed her words as the universal greeting gesture was exchanged. "An honor, Dr. Weston. Your species has adapted remarkably quickly to interstellar conventions." Dr. Weston smiled, revealing the peculiar white calcium structures humans used for food processing. "We're adaptable, if nothing else. Admiral, I understand you showed particular interest in our children's activities today." Zaxful's secondary heart accelerated slightly. His interest had been noticed. Merely observational curiosity. In hegemony culture, juvenile development follows strictly regulated enhancement protocols. The apparent chaos of your young one's activities is fascinating. Chaos. Dr. Weston laughed, the sound like musical tones to the Admiral's auditory receptors. "I suppose it might appear that way. We call it free play, essential for cognitive and social development." The Admiral's data stylus recorded her words automatically as he formulated his response. "The activities I observed today, particularly the territorial acquisition exercise with the fabric markers, seem to contain surprising elements of strategic complexity." "Capture the flag," Weston nodded. "A classic game. Children naturally create complex systems without adult interference. Our developmental psychology suggests that unstructured play builds neural pathways that formal education simply cannot." Admiral Zaxful's tertiary eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "Fascinating. In my culture, tactical and strategic thinking are reserved for military specialists after their second molt cycle. You encourage these patterns in all your offspring." Something flickered across Dr. Weston's face. Caution, perhaps. The Admiral's micro-expression analysis subroutine struggled with human facial subtleties. "We don't think of it as tactical training, Admiral. Play is how children explore their world, test boundaries, and develop social bonds." A human server passed with another tray of drinks. The Admiral noticed how the server navigated the crowded room with precise efficiency, another example of the spatial awareness that seemed common in humans. "Would you be interested in visiting one of our schools?" Dr. Weston asked. "We have several educational institutions that would welcome a distinguished visitor from the hegemony." "That would be most informative," the Admiral replied, perhaps too quickly. His cultural attaché Vex Lore, hovering nearby, twitched his warning antennae slightly at the Admiral's enthusiasm. Later, as the diplomatic reception wound down, Admiral Zaxful retreated to his private quarters in the embassy compound. The room was adapted to hegemony atmospheric preferences, denser oxygen levels and higher humidity, allowing him to remove his restrictive formal carapace coverings. "Computer, begin personal log entry," he commanded. The crystalline data storage unit hummed to life, its prismatic surface refracting the blue-tinted lights. Initial observations of human young indicate developmental anomalies worthy of detailed study. Their recreational activities, classified as games and play, contain sophisticated elements that parallel military training exercises in at least 37 distinct categories. The Admiral's appendages moved rapidly over his data display, organizing the day's observations into comparison matrices. Most concerning, their young display intuitive grasp of concepts our specialists required dedicated training to master. Core hypothesis forming. Humans have disguised their military development program as universal recreational behavior. The efficiency is remarkable. Training begins almost from birth and continues uninterrupted through their developmental stages. He paused, his primary heart pulsing with the implications. If my observations prove accurate, we have severely underestimated this species. Every human, not merely their designated warriors, possesses foundational combat and strategic capabilities. Further investigation is essential before the hegemony determines appropriate diplomatic and security protocols. The Admiral sealed his log entry with his genetic signature, then moved to the viewing portal. Earth's single moon hung in the night sky, reflecting light from their system's unassuming yellow star. Such a common world to produce such an uncommon species. Tomorrow would bring more observations, more data points, and perhaps answers to the question forming in his analytical mind. What exactly were humans preparing for? Captain Patel guided Admiral Zaxful through the bustling elementary school playground, weaving between groups of shouting children. The sounds were almost overwhelming to his sensitive auditory receptors, but he adjusted his translator's filters to compensate. "The gymnasium is through here," she explained, gesturing toward a large building. "Today's dodgeball tournament features our 4th and 5th graders, ages 9 to 11. The Admiral's data stylus remained concealed in his diplomatic robes, but his eidetic memory would record every detail. This was his 4th human educational facility this week, and each visit revealed new patterns in their developmental methodology. "Your patience with these visits is appreciated, Captain," he said, his translator modulating his natural clicking speech into smooth English. "Educational comparative analysis is a personal interest of mine." Captain Patel smiled politely, but the Admiral noted the slight tension in her facial muscles, cataloging it alongside other subtle tells he'd observed in his human liaison. She suspected something, even as she maintained her professional diplomacy. "Happy to help, Admiral, though I admit I'm curious why a distinguished military leader would spend so much time watching children throw balls at each other." Inside the gymnasium, they seated themselves on uncomfortable tiered benches as 2 teams of children lined up on opposite sides of a divided court. Multicolored spherical projectiles were arranged along the center line. The Admiral's tactical analysis subroutines engaged automatically. "The objective appears to be elimination of opposing forces through ranged attacks," he observed. Captain Patel laughed. "That's one way to describe dodgeball. The kids just think it's fun." A whistle blew and chaos erupted. Children charged forward, grabbed projectiles, and began throwing them with surprising force and accuracy. The Admiral's tertiary eyes widened as he recognized multiple advanced combat principles in action: resource acquisition, tactical withdrawal, coordinated strikes, defensive formations, and target prioritization. Most fascinating was a small female human who demonstrated exceptional evasive capabilities, twisting her body in ways that seemed to defy physical limitations, while simultaneously directing her team's defensive strategy. "Remarkable proprioceptive awareness in one so young," he murmured. "That's Emma Chen," Captain Patel said. "She's also in advanced mathematics and captains the debate team." The Admiral's gills fluttered with excitement beneath his ceremonial collar. The patterns were becoming undeniable. These games developed precisely the skills needed for adaptive combat and leadership. After the match concluded, with Emma's team achieving decisive victory, Captain Patel led him toward the school's cafeteria. As they walked, the Admiral noticed her checking her communication device several times. "Is something concerning you, Captain?" he inquired. She hesitated before responding. "Just some scheduling questions about tomorrow's visit to the Children's Interactive Museum. Their strategic thinking exhibit is being renovated, but the director assures me several installations will be operational for your tour." The Admiral detected the subtle deception. Something else was occupying her thoughts, but chose not to press further. Humans were becoming increasingly transparent to him after weeks of close observation. That evening, aboard his flagship cloaked in high orbit, Admiral Zaxful uploaded his observations to his secure private server. The data was becoming overwhelming. Each human game he documented contained elements of military training, so sophisticated that his own species only introduced them to specialist warriors after years of preliminary conditioning. Query update. He instructed his analysis system. Cross-reference observational data with historical human conflict records. The results flashed across his neural interface. Patterns of human innovation in warfare throughout their history showed remarkable correlation with childhood play activities, documented centuries before implementation. Roman testudo formations mirrored children's turtle games from earlier periods. Aircraft dogfighting tactics resembled children's tag games observed generations before powered flight. A disturbing theory began forming in the Admiral's analytical mind. What if human play wasn't just training for known warfare concepts? What if it was actually the evolutionary laboratory where warfare innovation originated? His private chamber door slid open, interrupting his thoughts. Science Officer Telvac entered, her exoskeleton showing stress patterns. "Admiral, Security Command has flagged your recent data transmissions," she reported, her voice low. "They're questioning the resource allocation to your human observation project." "Predictable," the Admiral responded. "Prepare the briefing materials. It's time to present my preliminary findings to the senior staff." "And what exactly are those findings, Admiral?" Telvac asked, her primary eyes focusing intently on him. Admiral Zaxful's chromatophores darkened with significance. "That we may have fundamentally misunderstood humanity's greatest strength, and potentially the greatest threat they pose to galactic stability." Silence fell across the secure briefing chamber as Admiral Zaxful concluded his presentation. The holographic displays surrounding them showed complex comparative analyses. Human children playing hopscotch juxtaposed with combat movement patterns, building block constructions alongside military fortifications, video game interfaces matched with actual spacecraft control systems. Second Commander Krasr broke the silence first, his exoskeleton shifting uncomfortably. "With respect, Admiral, your evidence seems circumstantial. Pattern recognition algorithms can find similarities between unrelated phenomena if programmed to do so." "I anticipated your skepticism," the Admiral replied calmly. His upper appendage activated a new holographic sequence, footage from the dodgeball tournament he observed the previous day. Computer, Overlay Tactical Analysis Framework Alpha 7. The footage transformed, children outlined in glowing wireframes as movement vectors, threat assessments, and resource allocation patterns appeared in real time. The small human female, Emma Chen, glowed particularly bright in the analysis, her movements leaving trailing light patterns that matched advanced evasion templates from the Hegemony Combat Manual. "This is not pattern-seeking bias," the Admiral continued. "These are precise tactical principles we train our specialists to execute over years of conditioning. These human children perform them intuitively, without formal instruction, often before they've mastered basic mathematical concepts." Fleet Security Officer Vexnar leaned forward, his primary eyes narrowed. "Even if your analysis is correct, Admiral, what is your conclusion? That humans are deliberately disguising military training as recreational activity. To what end?" "The purpose remains unclear," Admiral Zaxthal admitted. "Perhaps to avoid detection by more advanced civilizations. Perhaps to maintain constant readiness without societal awareness. My hypothesis is still forming." Science Officer Telvac manipulated her data console, bringing up new displays. "I've been analyzing the Admiral's data against our historical first contact archives," she said. "Of the 37 spacefaring species we've encountered, none show this pattern of universal tactical development. Military capabilities are typically concentrated in specialist cadres. In human society, these capabilities appear distributed throughout the population." The implications hung heavy in the chamber's deliberately dense atmosphere. A species where every member possessed inherent tactical capabilities represented an unprecedented potential threat. "There's more," the Admiral said, nodding to Telvac. She activated another display sequence, children playing a complex board game called Settlers of Catan. This seemingly innocuous entertainment teaches resource management, territorial control, negotiation leverage, and long-term strategic planning. Telvac explained. The game objectives parallel interstellar colonization principles with disturbing accuracy. Fleet Commander Drazkel's chromatophores darkened with concern. How long has this been occurring? Archaeological evidence suggests these patterns have been present throughout human history, the Admiral replied. Their play has evolved alongside their technology, but the core principles remain consistent. We should recommend immediate containment protocols, Security Officer Vexnar said. If every human is effectively a latent warrior. That would be premature, Admiral Zaxthul interrupted. My investigation is incomplete. We lack critical context. What context could possibly mitigate this threat assessment? Vexnar demanded. The Admiral's secondary hearts pulsed with uncertainty. The evidence supported his hypothesis, yet something was missing. Some crucial element that would explain why humans would develop such capabilities, and yet show no sign of the aggressive expansion such advantages would enable. Intent, he finally answered. We understand what they're doing, but not why. For that, I need closer observation. I've arranged to participate in their cultural exchange program, living with a human family to observe their development patterns directly. The chamber erupted in objections. Fleet Commander Drazkel rose to his full height, heel slits flaring. This is unprecedented. You're our senior military strategist, and you propose to isolate yourself among potential hostiles. The Admiral remained unmoved. The diplomatic immunity protocols protect me, and I'll maintain encrypted communication channels. More importantly, this is our best opportunity to understand whether humans represent a threat or something else entirely. What something else could possibly explain these patterns? Second Commander Kraser asked. Admiral Zaxtul's chromatophores shifted to a thoughtful blue. That's precisely what I intend to discover. Admiral Zaxtul stood awkwardly in the Jacobson family's living room. His exoskeleton adjusted to appear less intimidating in the domestic setting. Sarah Jacobson, a molecular biologist with kind eyes and perpetual smile, showed him to the guest bedroom that had been modified with environmental controls to accommodate his physiological needs. I hope everything's comfortable, she said. The children are absolutely thrilled you're staying with us. They've been learning about hegemony culture in school. Your hospitality honors me, the Admiral replied, his translator modulating his natural clicks and whistles into smooth English. I look forward to observing, participating in, your family routines. He had barely settled his few possessions when a soft knock came at the door. 10-year-old Maya Jacobson stood in the doorway, holding a flat box with colorful imagery on its surface. Mom said you might be resting, but I wondered if you wanted to play chess. Her eyes darted to his multiple appendages. Dad says you probably have an advantage with all those hands. The Admiral accessed his cultural database. Chess. Strategic simulation with opposing forces and variable unit capabilities. I would be pleased to learn this game. Maya's face brightened. Great, I'll set up in the dining room. 20 minutes later, Admiral Zaxthul stared at the checkered board with his primary and secondary eyes, his tertiary set still analyzing the child sitting across from him. She had explained the pieces, their movement patterns, and basic objectives with remarkable clarity. The game's strategic depth was immediately apparent to his trained mind. Your bishop is threatened, Maya pointed out helpfully. The Admiral moved the piece to safety, still processing the implications. This game contained principles of unit coordination, positional advantage, and sacrifice calculation that paralleled advanced military theory. And this human child had apparently been playing it since age 5. Check, Maya announced 3 moves later, her knight threatening his king. By their third game, the Admiral was fully engaged, his tactical subroutines completely focused on the board. Maya had won the first 2 matches handily, but he was adapting quickly. You're getting better, she said, capturing his pawn. Most adults get frustrated when they lose to a kid. Learning requires failure analysis, he replied automatically, then noticed something unexpected. He was enjoying himself. The pure intellectual challenge without consequences was strangely liberating. Their game was interrupted by 14-year-old Trevor bursting into the room, waving a portable electronic device. Maya. Emma just reached diamond rank in Stellar Conquest. She's streaming her promotion match right now. The Admiral's antennae twitched with interest. Stellar Conquest. It's just a stupid game, Maya said, but her tone suggested admiration rather than dismissal. Trevor thrust his device toward the Admiral. It's a space strategy game. Emma's like crazy good. She's the youngest player ever to reach diamond rank. On the small screen, the Admiral watched as a human female, the same Emma Chen he'd observed in the dodgeball tournament, manipulated complex fleet formations against a virtual opponent. Her resource management, tactical positioning, and strategic anticipation were extraordinary. "This is entertainment?" he asked carefully. "Yeah, but super competitive," Trevor explained. "Emma's probably going to go pro after high school. There are huge tournaments with millions in prize money." That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Admiral Zach Stoll encoded his daily observations in his secure communicator. The Jacobson parents were watching something called a movie in the next room, a fictional narrative about humans overcoming an alien invasion through ingenious adaptation and unexpected tactics. Preliminary domestic observation confirms initial hypothesis, but suggests significant contextual misinterpretation, he recorded. Human play activities indeed develop tactical, strategic, and adaptive capabilities that parallel military training, but the emotional context differs significantly from our combat preparation protocols. He paused, struggling to articulate the pattern he was beginning to perceive. Humans appear to derive pleasure from challenge itself. Their games create artificial obstacles specifically to experience overcoming them. Chess contains no random elements. Victory comes purely through superior strategic thinking. Yet children voluntarily engage with it repeatedly, regardless of outcomes. He added a security classification to the file before continuing. Most significant observation. These capabilities are not developed for application against other species. The competitive aspects appear directed primarily at problem-solving, self-improvement, and social bonding. This suggests a fundamental misunderstanding in our threat assessment models. The Admiral's appendages hovered over the transmitter as he added a final note. Request permission to extend cultural immersion period. Current hypothesis requires substantial revision. The purpose of human play may be more profound and potentially more beneficial to the hegemony than initially suspected. The suburban cul-de-sac transformed into a tactical battlefield as Admiral Zach Stoll crouched behind the Jacobson's recycling bins. His uniform, a hegemony-issue environmental suit modified for Earth conditions, was stained with splashes of water. His normally dignified posture abandoned. He clutched 2 water balloons with his upper appendages while scanning for movement from the Henderson children's position. How had he found himself in this situation? The neighborhood water fight had begun as simple observation, an opportunity to document yet another human recreational activity. Yet somehow, he'd been recruited onto Maya's team when the Henderson children launched a surprise attack from behind their hedge. "Admiral Z." Trevor's urgent whisper came from behind the garden shed. "We need covering fire. Emma and Jordan have us pinned down." The Admiral's tactical training activated automatically. He assessed the terrain, identified firing angles, and calculated trajectory compensations for the unusual projectiles. With precise movements, he launched both water balloons in quick succession over the decorative birdbath, serving as the Henderson's cover. Surprised squeals confirmed direct hits. That was awesome. Trevor emerged from cover, his t-shirt already soaked. "Where did you learn to throw like that?" The Admiral's translator paused, searching for an appropriate response. "Hegemony Command School," he finally answered. "Orbital mechanics and trajectory calculation." Trevor grinned. "Cool. We're teaching aliens to have water fights." A moment of clarity struck the Admiral with unexpected force. The boy was correct. but not in the way he intended. The hegemony training programs that had taught Zach's full precision targeting had been strictly military in purpose. Grim, serious affairs with performance evaluations and consequence matrices for failure. Yet here, the same skills were being applied in an activity generating what humans called fun. His revelation was interrupted by a surprise attack from 6-year-old Ellie, who somehow had maneuvered behind him with a water pistol. Cold water struck his exoskeleton as she giggled triumphantly. "Got you, Admiral Z." Instead of the competitive frustration he would expect from a hegemony trainee, he found himself appreciating the child's successful flanking maneuver. "Indeed you did. Excellent tactical approach, Ellie." The afternoon continued, alliances shifting, objectives changing, rules being negotiated on the fly. The Admiral observed and participated with growing fascination. When water supplies ran low, the children adapted their strategies. When younger participants needed assistance, older ones adjusted the parameters to include them. The entire conflict simulation contained adaptive elements that hegemony training programs deliberately eliminated in favor of standardization. Later, as the families gathered for a communal meal on the Jacobsons' patio, Admiral Zach's foal found himself seated beside Dr. Henderson, a theoretical physicist. "Your children showed remarkable strategic adaptation today," the Admiral noted, carefully consuming the hot dog he'd been offered using specialized feeding implements. Dr. Henderson laughed. "They're just having fun. Though I must say, you seem to enjoy yourself as well. First time in a water fight." "Indeed. In my culture, such activities would be considered," he searched for the appropriate term, "frivolous." "Sometimes frivolity has purpose," Dr. Henderson replied thoughtfully. "Play is how we learn without the burden of consequences." That night, recording his observations in the guest room, Admiral Zaxfull struggled to articulate the pattern crystallizing in his mind. The hegemony approached all development as deliberate, structured progression toward predetermined outcomes. Efficiency was paramount. Play was wasteful by definition. Yet the evidence suggested humans achieved more effective results through these seemingly inefficient methods. The children's adaptive capabilities, creative problem-solving, and collaborative skills exceeded those of hegemony specialists with years of formal training. Continuation of log entry, he recorded. Today's water fight revealed a critical distinction in developmental philosophy. Hegemony training optimizes for known scenarios and established parameters. Human play optimizes for adaptation to unknown variables. He paused, his chromatophores shifting to deep blue as he considered the implications. This may explain humanity's remarkably rapid technological advancement despite their short lifespans. Their play creates cognitive frameworks that anticipate change rather than resist it. The military capabilities I initially identified are merely secondary effects of a development system optimized for something far more fundamental, adaptation itself. The Admiral's gill slits flexed as he inhaled deeply, preparing to transmit his most significant conclusion. Revised threat assessment. The danger humans pose is not military aggression, but paradigm disruption. Their developmental methodology, play, represents an evolutionary advantage our hierarchical systems cannot match without fundamental restructuring. He encoded the message with his highest security clearance before adding a final note. Recommendation. The hegemony must reevaluate humans not as potential adversaries, but as evolutionary innovators. Their play may be the most valuable methodology in the galaxy, not for war, but for advancement beyond our current limitations. As he transmitted the message, Admiral Zaxfull wondered how the Hegemony Council would respond. His conclusion contradicted centuries of developmental orthodoxy. Yet the water still drying on his exoskeleton testified to the truth he had discovered. Sometimes the most profound insights came from the most unexpected sources, even a suburban water balloon fight. The Hegemony Council chamber's architecture was designed to intimidate, soaring crystalline spires that amplified authoritative voices while diminishing dissent through subtle acoustic manipulation. Admiral Zaxthal stood at the center of the speaking platform, acutely aware of the tension vibrating through the chamber's deliberately dense atmosphere. "Your conclusions are not merely unorthodox, Admiral." Fleet Commander Drazkel's voice reverberated from the highest tier. "They contradict fundamental hegemony security protocols. You suggest we embrace methodologies that undermine our hierarchical stability." The Admiral's exoskeleton remained in formal configuration despite his discomfort. 3 standard weeks had passed since his cultural immersion with the Jacobson family. His recall to Hegemony Command had been immediate following his transmission of revised assessments. "I report what I observed, Commander. Human play behavior produces adaptive capabilities our training systems cannot match. This represents an opportunity, not a threat." Strategic Minister Vexkol's chromatophores darkened with skepticism. "Yet your own initial reports identified concerning parallels between their games and military training. You documented human children performing tactical maneuvers that would challenge our specialists." "Those observations were accurate but incomplete," the Admiral replied. "I misinterpreted the purpose. Humans don't play to prepare for conflict. They play to develop adaptability across all domains. The military applications are incidental." High Chancellor Zorvex leaned forward, her ancient exoskeleton creaking slightly. "Your records indicate particular attachment to the Jacobson offspring. Perhaps emotional contamination has compromised your analysis." The accusation was predictable but still stung. Admiral Zaxthul's secondary hearts accelerated slightly with an emotion his translator couldn't adequately name, something between indignation and concern. "My methodology remained rigorous throughout," he responded. "The Jacobson children demonstrated precisely the developmental patterns observed in wider human society. Their particular aptitudes simply provided clearer examples." The chamber's displays activated, showing footage from the Admiral's encrypted files. Maya explaining chess strategies, Trevor leading a fort-building exercise in the backyard, Ellie negotiating conflict resolution between neighborhood children with surprising diplomacy. "These capabilities appear benign in domestic settings," Security Chief Krasvor noted. "Yet applied to interstellar expansion, they could threaten hegemony stability. Our intelligence division reports 3 human colony ships already under construction. Their adaptation rate exceeds our model's predictions." Admiral Zaxthul felt the conversation slipping away from his control. The Council was viewing human potential through the lens of threat assessment rather than opportunity. "Honored Council, I request permission to present one final observation." The High Chancellor's gesture granted permission. "During my final day with the Jacobson family, I observed Trevor struggling with a mathematical problem. Instead of providing the solution, his father transformed the task into a game, with imaginary explorers navigating mathematical terrain. The child's frustration became engagement. Within minutes, he was solving equations he had previously found impossible." The Admiral paused, ensuring his next words would register with proper significance. "The critical insight is this: humans use play not to prepare for what they know, but for what they don't know. Their games create cognitive frameworks for navigating uncertainty itself. This is not a military strategy. It's an evolutionary advantage." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Admiral pressed his advantage. "The hegemony has maintained galactic stability through careful control of advancement rates, but the universe does not respect our schedules. Climate shifts, stellar phenomena, resource limitations, these challenges accelerate regardless of our preparedness. Humans' adaptive capacity represents a valuable resource in addressing unpredictable challenges." Before the Council could respond, the chamber's emergency protocols activated. Displays shifted to show tactical feeds. Hegemony fleet movements near the Sol system. Fleet Commander Drazkel rose, his exoskeleton expanding to combat configuration. "Precautionary deployment, authorized after your initial reports. 3 battle groups maintaining strategic positions near human territory." The Admiral's gill slits flared with alarm. "You position battle groups without Council authorization. Security contingency protocols permitted it. Drazkel replied dismissively, and fortuitously so. Our intelligence division reports unusual activity in human space. Their defense grid has elevated to second-level alert status. The implications struck Admiral Zaxful with devastating clarity. His research, intended to foster understanding, had triggered a security response that humans would inevitably detect. Their remarkable adaptive capabilities, faced with perceived threat, would mobilize toward defense. The very misunderstanding he had hoped to prevent was unfolding. "You must recall those ships immediately," he urged. "Humans interpret actions, not intentions. Battle group positioning will be perceived as aggression regardless of our explanatory dispatches." High Chancellor Zorvex's primary eyes narrowed. "You suggest we expose ourselves to potential threat based on your revised assessment." "I suggest we avoid creating the very threat we fear," the Admiral replied. "Humans' adaptive capabilities make them dangerous only if threatened. Their play prepares them to respond creatively to perceived hostility." A tense silence filled the chamber before the Admiral spoke again, his voice lowered but intense. "We stand at a pivotal moment between species. I propose a demonstration that will reveal the true nature of human adaptability, not as a weapon, but as a bridge between our civilizations." Great Meadow Park stretched beneath the gray sky, its 200 acres transformed into what Admiral Zaxful privately considered his greatest tactical gamble in 3 centuries of military service. 600 human children and 300 young hegemony cadets occupy the grounds, organized into mixed-species teams identified by colored bandanas. The weather control systems predicted clear conditions, Captain Patel said with concern, eyeing the darkening clouds from their observation platform. "The meteorological office reports an unexpected pressure system moving in. Should we postpone?" asked Hegemony Cultural Attaché Vex Lore, his antennae twitching nervously. "No," the Admiral replied firmly. "Unpredictability is an essential element of this demonstration." Below them, the Intergalactic Friendship Games were underway after 3 days of careful preparation. Initial contact between species had been awkward. Hegemony cadets were unaccustomed to unstructured interaction, while human children found the aliens' formal communication patterns amusing. Yet adaptation had begun more quickly than even the Admiral had predicted. He focused his tertiary eyes on a capture-the-flag exercise where Maya Jacobson was patiently explaining strategic concepts to a confused hegemony science cadet. Nearby, a mixed group worked on constructing a temporary fort from supplied materials, with Trevor Jacobson and 2 hegemony engineering trainees debating structural integrity with surprising camaraderie. "Our Security Council remains skeptical," Vexlor noted quietly. "They view this as a dangerous exposure of our young ones to human influence." "Yet they permitted it," the Admiral replied. "Only because the human diplomatic crisis demanded unconventional resolution. 3 hegemony battle groups and human defense systems remain on high alert. We have limited time before military protocols override diplomatic efforts." The Admiral understood the stakes perfectly. This demonstration needed to provide irrefutable evidence of human adaptability's true nature, not as a threat, but as a complementary approach to the hegemony's structured methodologies. A brilliant flash illuminated the darkening sky, followed seconds later by a thunderclap that reverberated across the park. Rain began falling in heavy sheets as the storm arrived with unexpected intensity. "Emergency protocols are in place," Captain Patel assured him, activating her communication device. "We can have evacuation vehicles here within." She stopped mid-sentence, her attention drawn to the activity below. The Admiral watched with mounting fascination as something extraordinary unfolded across the park. Without central direction, the game teams were transforming their activities into organized emergency response. The capture-the-flag groups, already divided into functional units, rapidly redeployed to gather younger participants from exposed areas. Fort-building teams shifted their construction to create rain shelters and improvised bridges over rapidly forming water channels. Most remarkable was the communication adaptation. Unable to hear verbal instructions over the storm, human children introduced hegemony cadets to hand signals that spread through the groups with astonishing speed. The universal translation devices were failing in the heavy rain, yet coordination continued unimpeded. Remarkable, Vexlor whispered, his scientific objectivity momentarily overwhelmed. Admiral Zaxtol's chromatophores pulsed with vindication. This is precisely what I've been attempting to communicate to the Council. Human play creates adaptive frameworks that can be repurposed for unexpected challenges. They're not simply learning specific skills. They're learning how to learn. A particularly bright lightning strike hit a massive oak at the far end of the park, sending a large branch crashing down near a group of younger participants. Before the observation team could react, a mixed group of human and hegemony youths had already mobilized, creating a rescue team that extracted 2 trapped youngsters with efficiency that would impress professional emergency responders. No casualties reported, Captain Patel confirmed, monitoring emergency channels. Medical teams are standing by, but the children are handling the situation remarkably well. Not just handling it, the Admiral noted, improving upon our emergency protocols. Observe. He directed their attention to the central pavilion, where Emma Chen, the human child who had impressed him during the dodgeball tournament, had established an impromptu command center. Using a modified chessboard, she was tracking team locations and resource distribution with hegemony mathematical precision while incorporating human adaptability. She's created a hybrid organizational system, Vexlor observed with astonishment. It incorporates hegemony hierarchical efficiency with human decentralized adaptation. As evacuation vehicles finally arrived, the Admiral noticed something that would form the cornerstone of his report to the Hegemony Council. The human children and hegemony cadets weren't simply cooperating. They were learning from each other, synthesizing their different approaches into something more effective than either would have created alone. This is the true purpose of human play, Admiral Zaxthal said quietly, his translator barely audible over the storm. Not preparation for conflict, but preparation for collaboration under unpredictable conditions. The rain continued falling as the last participants were safely evacuated, but the Admiral's conviction had solidified into certainty. The answer to the question that had driven his investigation, what were humans preparing for, had revealed itself in the midst of chaos. They were preparing for exactly this, the capacity to face the unknown alongside others, adapting and improving through shared challenge. The implications for both civilizations were profound, if only the Hegemony Council could overcome its fear long enough to recognize the opportunity before them. The Great Hall of the Unified Earth Government fell silent as Admiral Zaxthal approached the central podium. 3 days had passed since the events at Great Meadow Park. 3 days of intense diplomatic negotiations, data analysis, and preparation for this unprecedented joint session. Behind him sat representatives from humanity and the hegemony, their previous tensions transformed into cautious respect. The Admiral's chromatophores shifted to formal presentation blue as his translator activated. Distinguished representatives of Earth and the hegemony, he began. I stand before you at a pivotal moment between our civilizations. Holographic displays activated around the hall, showing footage from the intergalactic friendship games. Children from both species engaged in various activities alongside parallel images of their response to the unexpected storm. My investigation began with a misinterpretation. Observing human children at play, I identify patterns resembling military training, strategic thinking, tactical coordination, adaptive problem-solving. I concluded, incorrectly, that humanity was disguising preparation for conflict as recreational activity. The Admiral paused, allowing his next words proper significance. The error in my analysis was not in recognizing these patterns, but in misunderstanding their purpose. Human play is indeed training, not for war, but for adaptation itself. Maya Jacobson, seated with her family in the front row, caught the Admiral's upper eye. She offered a small wave, which he acknowledged with a subtle gesture that would have been considered inappropriate in traditional hegemony diplomatic settings. When unexpected crisis arose during our demonstration, I witnessed the true function of human play methodologies. The children transformed competitive activities into collaborative emergency response without centralized direction. The capabilities developed through their games, strategic thinking, resource management, communication, were repurposed instantly to address unforeseen challenges. On the displays, footage showed human children teaching hegemony cadets impromptu sign language when translation devices failed in the heavy rain. Another screen displayed Trevor's engineering team repurposing construction materials to create emergency bridges over flooding areas. The hegemony has long prided itself on educational efficiency, teaching exactly what is needed for predetermined functions. We optimize for known parameters. Humanity has shown us a different approach, optimizing for the unknown itself. High Chancellor Zorvex shifted uncomfortably in her ceremonial exoskeleton. The Admiral knew his presentation challenged centuries of hegemony developmental orthodoxy, but the evidence was undeniable. Most significantly, we observed something unexpected during the crisis response: the integration of our different approaches. Hegemony hierarchical organization with human adaptive flexibility created emergency management systems more effective than either civilization would have developed independently. The displays showed Emma Chen's improvised command center, where her hybrid organizational system had coordinated the entire evacuation without a single casualty despite deteriorating conditions. This discovery has profound implications for both our civilizations, the Admiral continued. What humans call play may be their most valuable contribution to galactic development, not as curiosity, but as methodology. Ambassador Chen nodded slightly from her position at the diplomatic table, recognizing the significance of this acknowledgement. I therefore propose the establishment of an intergalactic institute of development, a collaborative venture to study and implement hybrid learning methodologies, drawing from both our traditions. The military tensions that briefly arose between our peoples can be transformed into educational cooperation that benefits all. The formal proposal appeared on the displays, already endorsed by key representatives from both civilizations. The hegemony offers its systematic approach to knowledge organization and retention. Humanity offers its adaptive, play-based methodologies for navigating uncertainty. Together, we create something greater than either could achieve alone. As the proposal details scrolled across the displays, Admiral Zax Thole noticed 6-year-old Ellie Jacobson fidgeting in her seat. Her mother whispered something in her ear, but the child's expression remained concerned. Following a surprising impulse, the Admiral departed from his prepared remarks. "Young Ellie Jacobson has a question," he announced, causing a ripple of surprise through the formal gathering. "Would you share it with us, Ellie?" The child stood, momentarily overwhelmed by the attention, before finding her voice. "Does this mean you'll stay and play more games with us, Admiral Z?" A murmur of amusement traveled through the human delegation, but the Admiral recognized the profound question beneath the simple words. "In a manner of speaking, yes," he replied. "Though perhaps play is not the correct term. What your species calls play, mine might better describe as adaptive development through simulated challenges. What matters is not the terminology, but the recognition that we have much to learn from each other." As the formal proceedings continued, the Admiral reflected on his journey. From military observer to cultural translator between species, the deadly purpose he had initially feared in human play had revealed itself to be something far more profound. Not a weapon for destruction, but a tool for growth that his own civilization had long overlooked. Later that evening, as diplomatic protocols concluded, Admiral Zax Thole found himself in the Jacobsons' backyard once more. The formal reception had ended hours ago, but he had accepted their invitation to return to where his understanding had truly begun. "Your move, Admiral Z," Maya said from across the chessboard they had set up on the patio table. The garden lights illuminated the game as dusk settled over the neighborhood. In the distance, he could hear Trevor explaining hegemony mathematical concepts to a group of fascinated friends. Sarah and Mark Jacobson watched from the kitchen window, their expressions containing the same mixture of pride and curiosity the Admiral had come to recognize as distinctly human. As he moved his bishop across the board, Admiral Zax Foll realized he was experiencing something unprecedented in his long military career. He was playing not to analyze, not to gather intelligence, but simply for the joy of the challenge itself. Perhaps, he thought as Maya countered his move with unexpected brilliance, this was the most profound lesson humans had to teach, that preparation for an uncertain future could be approached not as burden, but as opportunity. Not as duty, but as play. "Check," Maya announced with a grin. Indeed, the Admiral thought, studying both the board and the stars becoming visible above. For both our species, the real game has just begun.